The glass beneath Lucia's fingertips was cold, slick with condensation that clung to the massive windows overlooking the city. From this high up, Chicago didn't look real. Just a blur of light and motion far below, a world that never noticed people like her. She hummed softly as she wiped slow circles into the glass, the melody an old Sicilian lullaby her grandmother used to sing when the nights were long and the cupboards were empty. It had no words she understood, just a wistful tune that clung to memory and warmth. 6 months. That's how long she had been cleaning the homes of the powerful, the rich, the untouchable. And still, none of them intimidated her quite like this one. The penthouse belonged to Vincenzo Russo, a name whispered in certain corners of the city, a man with money, power, and a reputation that could make men twice his size step aside without a word. People said he'd built his empire on the ashes of enemies who never saw him coming. People said he had no heart left. You missed a spot. The deep voice broke the silence, sending a shiver down Lucia's spine. She nearly dropped her cloth, spinning toward the source. He was standing a few feet away, tall and composed, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that looked like it had been sewn directly onto his body. She hadn't heard him enter. No one ever did. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, quickly scrubbing at a perfectly clean patch of glass. Her reflection stared back at her, pale and anxious, with strands of dark hair escaping their bun. Behind her, his silhouette loomed like a shadow that had taken shape. "That song," he said after a pause, stepping closer until the scent of his cologne, cedar, smoke, something expensive and dangerous, surrounded her. "What is it?" "It's nothing," Lucia replied, keeping her gaze fixed on the window. "Just something my mother taught me. I can stop if it hers you." "I didn't say it bothered me." Vincenzo's tone was unreadable, his eyes darker than the storm clouds gathering over the lake. He was known for many things: ruthless efficiency, calculated cruelty, the ability to make people vanish without a trace. But music wasn't one of them. He was known for rejecting every woman who tried to capture his attention, known for keeping his world small and impenetrable. And yet, here he was, lingering near a maid because of a song. "The melody is Sicilian," he murmured, almost to himself. Lucia swallowed hard. She had never thought of it that way, but now that he'd said it, she realized he was right. The tune carried the weight of old soil, of sea winds and forgotten stories. But why would a man like Vincenzo care about a lullaby sung by a nobody like her? When she didn't respond, he stepped even closer. The air seemed to shift around them, charged and unsteady. "Sing it," he said quietly. Her breath caught. "I don't really sing in front of people, sir." "You've been singing for the last hour." "I was humming. That's different." One corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile, more like the ghost of one. "You're not afraid of me." "I'm terrified of you, sir." "Yet you argue." Her hands trembled as she placed the cloth on the sill, afraid she might drop it. The logical thing to do was to obey, finish her work, and leave. But something about the way he was looking at her, not like a servant, but like a puzzle he couldn't solve, made it impossible to move. "Sing for me," he said, voice soft but carrying the weight of command. Lucia closed her eyes and obeyed. The notes slipped from her lips like silk, trembling at first, then steady as memory took over. The song filled the cavernous penthouse, curling around marble and glass, weaving through the silence like a spell. Vincenzo didn't move. He stood utterly stained, ill, his face unreadable, but something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of recognition, of memory, of something dangerously close to longing. When the final note faded, the silence between them was heavier than before. "Where did you learn that?" he asked, voice rougher now. "My grandmother," Lucia said quietly. "She came from Sicily as a girl." His gaze sharpened. "What was her name?" "Rosalia Marino." Something changed then, just for a heartbeat, before his mask slipped back into place. He adjusted his cufflinks, gold glinting with an emblem she didn't recognize. "You may go." Lucia gathered her supplies with shaking hands, heart hammering. As she left the room, she felt his eyes follow her, burning into her back long after she disappeared from sight. She didn't know why the song mattered. She didn't know why he had looked at her like that. But somewhere deep inside, beneath fear and confusion, a strange certainty stirred. Whatever she had awakened in Vincenzo Russo, whatever it was that haunted him, it was only the beginning. Lucia had cleaned dozens of homes in her life, but none of them lingered in her mind the way Vincenzo Russo's penthouse did. Days after that strange encounter, her thoughts kept circling back to the moment his voice had wrapped around her name and demanded a song. She told herself it was just curiosity that made her heart race when she thought of him, but deep down, she knew there was something else, something far more dangerous, stirring beneath the surface. When she returned to the penthouse the following week, the air inside felt different, heavier, as if it was waiting for something to happen. Marco, the head of security, greeted her at the door with his usual blank expression, but his eyes followed her longer than usual as she stepped inside. Every sound seemed amplified, every shadow deeper. It wasn't until she started humming again, quietly at first, that she felt the tension in the room shift. She didn't realize he was home until she saw his reflection in the glass Shah he was polishing. He was leaning against the doorway, hands tucked casually into his pockets, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. The story said he was cold, incapable of feeling anything beyond ruthless ambition, but the way he looked at her now betrayed a flicker of something else: curiosity, hunger, recognition. "You always sing when you think no one is listening," he said, voice low and smooth. Lucia's hands froze against the glass. "It helps me work," she answered without turning around. "And that song," he asked again. "The same one, always the same one." "It's an old family thing," she said quickly, hoping to end the conversation. But Vincenzo was not a man who let go of things easily. He crossed the room slowly, each step deliberate, closing the distance between them. Lucia's heart thudded in her chest as his reflection grew larger in the glass. "Do you know what that song means?" he asked softly. She shook her head. "My grandmother used to sing it, but she never explained." He studied her face as if searching for a lie. "That melody is known only in a handful of villages in western Sicily," he murmured. "It is more than a lullaby." Something in his tone made her breath catch. "What does it mean?" she whispered. "Not yet," he replied, stepping back. "There are things you need to know first, and people who might want to know about you." Before Lucia could ask what he meant, his phone buzzed sharply. The mask of emotion vanished from his face, replaced by cold precision. He answered without a word, listening intently, his jaw tightening with every second. When he hung up, his eyes were darker than before. "You need to leave by the service elevator," he ordered. "Now." She stared at him, confused. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he said too quickly. "Just do as I say." The urgency in his voice sent a ripple of fear through her. She gathered her things and hurried toward the back hallway. But before she stepped into the elevator, she glanced over her shoulder. Vincenzo was standing by the window, speaking quietly into his phone, but his body was tense, coiled like a predator ready to strike. That night, Lucia couldn't sleep. Every detail replayed in her mind: the look in his eyes when she sang, the way his demeanor changed after the phone call, the strange warning about people wanting to know about her. None of it made sense. The following morning, a black car was parked outside her apartment building. It was there when she left for work, and still there when she returned hours later. At first, she told herself it was a coincidence, but by the third day, her chest was tight with unease. On the fourth day, the car was gone, but a plain white envelope had been slipped under her door. Inside was a single sheet of paper with 5 words written in elegant handwriting. "Stop singing or you'll regret it." Her hands trembled as she read the message over and over. Someone was watching her, someone who knew about the song. And if Vincenzo was right, that lullaby was more than just a memory from her childhood. Across the city in a dimly lit office, Vincenzo Russo stared at a photo of Lucia taken from a distance. His instincts had been right. The lullaby had drawn attention. And if she was who he suspected she was, then the quiet maid humming Sicilian songs while she worked was about to become the most valuable and most dangerous person in his world. The message burned in Lucia's pocket like a live ember all day long. "Stop singing or you'll regret it." She read it again and again until the words blurred together, and still they refused to lose their grip on her mind. It was no prank. The handwriting was elegant and deliberate, and the threat felt real. Every time a stranger looked her way on the street, every time a car slowed behind her, she felt a cold spike of fear crawl up her spine. Someone was watching, someone who knew. By the time she reached Vincenzo's penthouse for her next shift, her nerves were frayed and her stomach churned with anxiety. She almost turned around twice before stepping inside, but something deeper than fear kept her moving. Curiosity, the need for answers. The man himself was waiting for her this time, seated in a leather chair by the window, a glass of amber liquid in his hand. He didn't greet her, didn't offer the faintest smile. He simply stared until she felt pinned in place by his gaze. "You received a message," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Lucia's heart stumbled. "How did you know?" His eyes flicked toward a sleek phone on the table beside him. "I have people watching over you. I needed to know how quickly they'd make a move once you sang again." She swallowed hard, anger rising to the surface. "You used me as bait." He rose from the chair and crossed the room in 2 strides. His presence was overwhelming, the kind that stole breath and made logic vanish. "If they were going to come for you, it was better they revealed themselves now rather than later," he said, calmly. She wanted to yell, to tell him that he had no right to manipulate her life like that, but the fear in his eyes silenced her. It wasn't for himself. It was for her. "They know who you are, Lucia, or at least they suspect. And if they confirm it, they will not stop until you are gone." "Who are they?" she whispered. His jaw tightened. "Enemies of your bloodline." The word bloodline hit her like a physical blow. "My family are restaurant workers and teachers. We're no one." He looked at her then with something like pity. "That's the lie you were told to keep you safe." He gestured for her to follow and led her into a study she had never entered before, the walls lined with dark shelves heavy with books and old photographs. He opened a drawer and pulled out a faded image. A large gathering of people stood in front. Tie of a sprawling villa, men in tailored suits, women draped in pearls and silk. Near the center of the group, a young woman with the same dark eyes and stubborn chin as Lucia held a small child in her arms. "This is Palermo, 1989, he said, "a gathering of the Marino family, one of the oldest and most respected names in Sicily." Lucia's breath caught. "That's my grandmother." He nodded once. "And the child she's holding is your mother." It didn't make sense. Her grandmother had run a tiny bakery in Queens until she passed away. There had never been any mention of Sicily or power or family names whispered with reverence and fear. Why would she lie? Because 30 years ago the Marino family was betrayed. Their estate was attacked. Most were slaughtered. A few vanished. Rumor had it they fled to America under new names. Lucia stared at the photograph until her vision blurred. It couldn't be real. It had to be some elaborate manipulation. But then Vincenzo rolled up his sleeve and showed her something etched into his skin, a tattoo of an intricate crest. It was identical to the symbol carved into the edge of the photograph. "My family has been at war with theirs for decades, and now it seems the last Marino has resurfaced." Fear churned into confusion, and confusion twisted into something hotter. Anger. "If this is true, then why are people threatening me? Because your existence threatens their control. The Marino name still carries weight. Even the possibility of an heir is enough to shift the balance of power." The world tilted on its axis. Everything she thought she knew, her past, her family, her identity, cracked open under the weight of this revelation. The lullaby, the one she'd sung without thought since childhood, echoed in her mind like a siren. It wasn't just a song. It was a thread tying her to a world she never knew existed. Vincenzo watched her closely as the truth settled in. "You have a choice now, Lucia. You can walk away, disappear, prete, and none of this matters. Or you can face what's coming." She met his gaze, fire kindling beneath the fear. "And if I choose to face it." Then he said, stepping closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his body, "You will need me, because the people who sent that message will not stop. and they are closer than you think." As if summoned by his words, the lights in the penthouse flickered. A second later, a gunshot shattered the silence from somewhere below. Both of them froze, the air thick with the sound of distant chaos. Vincenzo's hand moved to the holster hidden beneath his jacket. "They've found you," he said, "and this time they're not sending warnings." The echo of the gunshot still rang in Lucia's ears as the world shifted into chaos around her. Marco's voice barked orders over the radio, heavy footsteps thundered in the hallway, and the penthouse, usually a cathedral of silence and control, erupted into a storm of motion. Vincenzo grabbed her wrist without a word and pulled her behind him, his body a living shield, as he guided her toward a hidden panel in the wall she had never noticed before. It slid open with a soft hiss, revealing a steel-lined corridor. "Move," he commanded. Lucia stumbled forward, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. "Who's attacking us?" she shouted over the noise. His voice was calm, cold, terrifyingly composed. "The Catalanos. They've been watching since the moment you sang. They were waiting for confirmation, and now they have it." The corridor twisted and turned before opening into a secure room, lined with monitors showing every angle of the penthouse. Armed men in black tactical gear were pouring through the main entrance, exchanging fire with Vincenzo's security team. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. "They're here for me," No Vincenzo said without looking at her. "They're here for what you represent. If you are who I believe you are, then you're a threat they can't allow to live." He turned to Marco, who had appeared behind them with a pistol drawn and a thin sheen of sweat on his brow. "Get her out. Use the secondary route." Marco hesitated. "And you?" Vincenzo's eyes never left the screens. "I'll buy you time." Lucia's heart lurched. "No, you can't stay here. Not for me." But he was already moving, loading a weapon from a hidden cabinet, his expression carved from stone. "This is my war, Lucia. It started long before you arrived." Marco didn't give her a chance to argue. He gripped her arm and pulled her through another exit that led to a service elevator. The ride down was suffocatingly silent. Lucia's mind raced with images of gunmen, of blood, of a life she had never asked for, dragging her into a nightmare. When the elevator doors opened, Marco led her through a network of underground tunnels beneath the building. They emerged blocks away, where a sleek black SUV waited. Marco shoved her inside and climbed in after. "Stay low. We're going to one of Mr. Russo's safe houses." As the vehicle sped through the city streets, Lucia pressed her forehead against the cool glass, her thoughts spiraling. How had she gone from cleaning windows to being hunted through the streets of Chicago? She wanted to believe this was some horrible mistake, that they had the wrong person. But deep down, a small, stubborn part of her knew the truth. They reached a nondescript building on the city's outskirts, surrounded by high walls and cameras. Marco ushered her inside quickly. It was quieter here, but the tension was suffocating. Within minutes, Vincenzo arrived, blood splattered on his shirt, his hands still gloved from combat. He was alive, but something had shifted in his eyes. Something darker, more dangerous. "It's begun," he said simply. "The Catalanos won't stop now." Lucia stared at him, fear and fury twisting together inside her. "This is insane. I don't know anything about this world. I don't want any part of it." "Then you need to disappear," Vincenzo replied. "We can create new identities for you and your brother, relocate you to another country. You'll never have to hear the name Marino again." She hesitated, picturing Matteo's frail body hooked up to machines, his laughter when she managed to scrape together enough money for his medication. Running meant safety, but it also meant leaving behind answers, and questions burned inside her now. About her grandmother, about the lullaby, about why men with guns were willing to die to erase her existence. "What happens if I stay?" she asked quietly. Vincenzo's gaze locked onto hers, a storm brewing beneath the surface. "Then you stop running. You stop pretending to be no one. You embrace who you are, and we make them regret ever threatening you." The room fell silent. The offer hung heavy between them. If she accepted, there was no turning back. If she refused, she would spend the rest of her life hiding, waiting for the next shadow to appear. Before she could speak, Marco burst into the room, breathless. "They've hit one of our warehouses. They're testing how far they can push." Vincenzo's jaw tightened. "And they'll push until we push back harder." He turned back to Lucia, stepping closer until she could feel the heat of his presence. "I can protect you, but I can't do it if you keep denying what you are. They already believe you're the Merino heir. Whether you accept it or not doesn't change that. The only choice you have left is whether to fight back." Something inside her shifted. The terrified maid who once scrubbed windows and hummed lullabies felt very far away. In her place was someone harder, someone braver. "Then teach me," she said. "If they want a Merino heir, I'll show them one." A flicker of something, pride, maybe admiration, crossed Vincenzo's face, then his expression hard. "And again. Good, because they'll come again. And next time, we won't run." Outside, rain began to fall, streaking down the windows like tears. Somewhere in the dark, enemies plotted their next move. And deep within the walls of the safe house, Lucia Marino, the girl who had been invisible her entire life, began to understand the power of being seen. The first rays of dawn spilled across the safe house walls, but Lucia had been awake for hours. Sleep had become a stranger since the night of the attack. Every sound made her flinch. Every shadow felt like a threat. Yet beneath the fear was something new and unrecognizable, a burning resolve that refused to fade. She had told Vincenzo to teach her, and he had taken her at her word. Now there was no going back. The next days were a blur of lessons and revelations. She was trained in how to notice a tale, how to read the subtle cues in a conversation, how to identify hidden weapons. She sat with Vincenzo over maps and documents, learning about the intricate web of alliances and betrayals that ruled their world. Names that had once meant nothing to her now carried deadly weight. And the more she learned, the more she realized how deep the scars of the past ran. One evening, after hours of studying, Vincenzo led her into a locked room she had never seen before. Inside were shelves of files, photos, and old journals, a history written in blood. "These are the records of the war between the Russos and the Catalanos," he explained. "Everything that led to the fall of the Marino family is in here." Lucia's hands trembled as she opened one of the folders. There were photos of men in suits shaking hands, newspaper clippings of fires and assassinations, coded letters that spoke of betrayal and revenge. One file stopped her cold. A photograph of her grandmother, Rosalia, younger but unmistakable, standing beside a man Vincenzo identified as Antonio Marino, her grandfather. Written beneath the image were 3 words that made Lucia's blood run cold: "High-value target eliminated." "They thought they killed them all." Vincenzo said so, "But your grandmother survived. And now you are here, finishing what they started." It wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming what was stolen, exposing the lies that had buried her family's name. And somewhere in the middle of it all, she realized, it was about Matteo. Her brother deserved a life free from fear, free from the shadow of enemies who would kill them for a name they never even knew they had. But just as she began to find strength in the path ahead, the walls around them shook with a new threat. Marco stormed into the room, his face ashen. "We have a problem." "What now?" Vincenzo asked, his voice tight. "A message intercepted from Catalano's men," Marco said. "They know about the boy." Lucia's stomach dropped. Matteo. Before she could react, an explosion shattered the far wall of the safe house. The lights flickered, alarms screamed, and smoke filled the corridor. Marco shoved a weapon into Vincenzo's hand and pulled Lucia behind him. "They're breaching the perimeter. We have to move now." They raced through the corridors as gunfire erupted outside. Lucia's mind was consumed with one thought: her brother. She reached his room just as 2 armed men burst through the opposite door. Time slowed. Vincenzo fired before they could react, 2 sharp cracks splitting the air, both men falling before they hit the ground. Matteo was curled on the bed, terrified but unharmed. "We have to go," Vincenzo said, lifting Matteo into his arms. "The safe house is compromised." Outside, chaos reigned. Vehicles burned in the driveway. Men shouted orders through the smoke. Bullets ricocheted off steel. The world Lucia had been thrown into had finally come crashing down around her, and in that moment, fear became fuel. They reached the garage where another SUV waited, engines running, bulletproof panels gleaming under the emergency lights. As Marco floored the accelerator and the car roared into the night, Lucia looked back at the burning safe house. Everything that had once represented safety was now ashes. The Catalanos were no longer sending messages or issuing threats. They were declaring war. And for the first time, Lucia understood what that truly meant. There would be no peace, no hiding, no surrender. Not until one family stood victorious and the other was erased from history. Vincenzo's jaw was tight as he stared out the window, his hands still steady despite the destruction they left behind. "They're escalating," he said quietly. "This was meant to shake us, to make us run." "And will we?" Lucia asked, her voice shaking only slightly. He turned to her, eyes dark and unyielding. "No, now we fight back." The SUV sped into the darkness, carrying with it a woman who was no longer a frightened maid clinging to survival. Lucia Marino was awakening to the fire in her blood, the fury in her lineage, and for the first time, she no longer felt like prey. She was ready to become the hunter. But deep in the shadows of the city, Salvatore Catalano watched their escape on a flickering screen and smiled. They were playing into his hands, and the next move, the one that would break them both, was already in motion. The rain hammered against the windshield as the SUV tore through the sleeping streets of Chicago. Every corner felt like an ambush waiting to happen, every flicker of headlights behind them a potential death sentence. Lucia held Matteo close, her heart pounding with a single thought. They would never stop until he was gone, until she was gone. The war she had been thrust into was no longer about history or vengeance. It was about survival. Vincenzo was silent in the front seat, his expression carved from steel, but Lucia could feel the storm brewing beneath his calm exterior. She had seen that look once before. On the night his father was gunned down in front of him. It was the look of a man who would burn the world to protect what mattered. They drove through a nondescript alley and into the hidden entrance of an underground facility. Steel doors slammed shut behind them, sealing them inside a place even most of Vincenzo's men didn't know existed. When the engine stopped, he turned to her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "This is where the real war begins," he said quietly. "The safe houses, the decoys, the guards, they were just layers. Now we strip everything away and strike first." Lucia tightened her grip on Matteo's hand. "Strike first? We're barely surviving." His eyes softened when they met hers. "Surviving isn't enough. As long as they think you're weak, they'll never stop. But if we take the fight to them, if we show them you're more than a target, they'll have to think twice." Over the next days, their world transformed into a command center. Maps of territories, surveillance footage, intercepted messages, everything the Russo network had gathered over decades was laid out before them. Names were circled, alliances dissected, vulnerabilities marked in red. Lucia watched and listened, absorbing every detail like her life depended on it. Because it did. One evening, Vincenzo placed a file in front of her. It was thin, but the weight of it made her stomach twist. Inside was a photo of a man in a tailored gray suit, smiling as he shook hands with politicians and businessmen. "This is Lorenzo Catalano, Salvatore's younger brother. He's the one running their operations now, and he's planning something big, something that could wipe us out completely." Lucia's pulse quickened. How do we stop him? Vincenzo's answer was simple. We make the first move. Their plan was reckless, dangerous, and completely unlike anything she had ever imagined herself part of. Using information leaked from a mole inside the Catalano network, they would intercept a weapons shipment that was due to arrive in the city within 72 hours. Without those weapons, Lorenzo's planned assault would collapse before it began, but it wouldn't be easy. The shipment would be heavily guarded, and one mistake could cost them everything. On the night of the mission, Lucia felt the weight of 100 years of blood on her shoulders. She wore a bulletproof vest that felt too heavy, and the pistol at her side terrified her more than the men they were about to face. Vincenzo noticed her trembling hands and touched her wrist lightly. "Fear is good," he said. "It means you understand what's at stake, but don't let it control you." They moved under the cover of darkness, their convoy slipping through the industrial district unnoticed. When they reached the abandoned docks where the shipment was due, the air was thick with tension. Through binoculars, they could see armed men patrolling the perimeter and cargo containers lined up along the water. Everything was going according to plan, until it wasn't. A flash of light split the night sky, followed by a deafening explosion that sent shockwaves through the ground. One of their vehicles erupted in flames, flipping onto its side. Gunfire followed, ripping through the silence as Catalano soldiers poured from the shadows. "It's an ambush!" Marco shouted, dragging Lucia behind a stack of crates. They knew we were coming. Bullets screamed past as chaos engulfed the docks. Vincenzo barked orders over the radio, rallying his men into defensive positions. Lucia clutched the pistol with shaking hands, the sound of Matteo's voice echoing in her mind. She couldn't die here. She wouldn't. Through the haze of smoke and gunfire, she saw him. Lorenzo Catalano himself, standing atop a shipping container, watching the battle unfold with a smug smile. It wasn't just about the weapons. This was a message. Vincenzo locked eyes with her from across the chaos, his jaw set. "Stay here." "No," she shouted back. "I'm ending this." Before anyone could stop her, Lucia broke cover and sprinted toward Lorenzo's position, weaving through the hail of bullets. He saw her coming and laughed, drawing a weapon of his own. "You think you can challenge me, little girl?" "I'm not a girl," she hissed, raising her gun. "I'm a Merino." The shot rang out, piercing the night. Lorenzo staggered back, blood blooming across his chest. He wasn't dead. Not yet. But his smile was gone. And in that moment, every man on that dock realized the war had changed. By the time the shooting stopped, the docks were drenched in smoke and silence. The shipment was theirs, but the cost was high. Several of Vincenzo's men lay wounded, and the enemy had escaped with just enough strength to retaliate. Back at the underground base, Lucia stared at her blood-stained hands, trembling with adrenaline and fear. Vincenzo approached silently, his expression unreadable. "You did it," he said. "You showed them who you are." But Lucia barely heard him. Her heart was racing with a terrifying new truth. The line she had once sworn she would never cross was far behind her now, and there was no going back. Somewhere in the darkness of the city, Salvatore Catalano received word of the failed ambush. He listened quietly, then smiled a cold, predatory smile. "Let them think they're winning," he said. "They haven't seen anything yet." The real war was only just beginning. The night after the ambush was eerily quiet, too quiet for a city that had just witnessed a small war on its docks. Lucia couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Lorenzo Catalano's face as he fell, the shock, the hatred, and the promise of revenge that burned in his dying gaze. She had pulled the trigger, she had crossed the line that could never be uncrossed, and though part of her wanted to break under the weight of what she had done, another part of her felt something darker, power. But peace was an illusion. 3 days later, intelligence reports arrived from their network. Catalano soldiers were retreating from known territory, thus, abandoning safe houses, clearing out fronts. It should have been a sign of victory. Instead, Vincenzo's instincts screamed the truth. This was not surrender. It was repositioning. "They're planning something," he said grimly, scanning a map covered in red markers. "They're consolidating, waiting for the right moment to strike." Lucia stood beside him, staring at the shifting pattern of enemy movement. "What's their next move?" Vincenzo pointed to a single location circled in black, a heavily guarded compound on the outskirts of the city. "This is their central command hub. If they're going to launch an offensive, it will start from here." "Then we destroy it," Lucia said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Vincenzo's eyes softened, but his tone remained cold. This isn't about destruction anymore. This is about leverage. If we can take that hub intact, we control their communication lines, their finances, their alliances. We end the war without firing another shot. The plan they formed was as dangerous as it was brilliant. They would infiltrate the compound from beneath, using the city's forgotten sewer tunnels to breach the lower levels. It would require precision, stealth, and nerves of steel. One mistake, and they'd be walking into a massacre. The night of the mission was cold and wet. Lucia moved through the darkness with a small team of Vincenzo's most trusted men, every sound amplified, every shadow a potential enemy. The stench of the tunnels was suffocating, but fear was a far greater weight pressing against her chest. For Matteo. For the family she never knew. For the future that would not exist if they failed. When they reached the access point, Marco hacked the old maintenance hatch and motioned for silence. They climbed up into the belly of the compound, a maze of concrete corridors humming with the sound of servers and distant footsteps. Lucia's pulse raced. One wrong turn, and they would be surrounded. They moved deeper, disabling cameras and neutralizing guards silently. But just as they approached the central control rows, something felt wrong. The hallways were too empty, the resistance too weak. Vincenzo's voice crackled over the comms. "Pull back. It's a trap." The words came too late. The moment they breached the door, steel shutters slammed down over every exit, sealing them inside. Red lights bathed the corridor as alarm sirens blared. A voice echoed through hidden speakers, cold, amused, and unmistakably familiar. "Welcome home, Marino." Lucia's blood turned to ice. It was Salvatore, not Lorenzo, not any of the lieutenants. Salvatore Catalano himself had been waiting for her. Screens flickered to life on the walls, displaying images from hidden cameras. Footage of their safe houses, Matteo's school, even inside Vincenzo's headquarters. He knew everything. "You've made quite the mess, little songbird." Salvatore's voice purred. "My brother lies in a hospital bed because of you. My business has lost millions, but killing you would be too easy. No, I have something better in mind." A door slid open on the far side of the room. Two of Salvatore's men dragged someone inside. Lucia's heart stopped when she saw who it was. Matteo, terrified and trembling, his hands bound. "Give me the codes to the Russo accounts," Salvatore said, his tone now sharp as a blade. "Do that, and your brother lives. Refuse, and I will send you his heart in a box." Lucia's knees buckled. She had trained for war, but nothing could prepare her for this. Vincenzo's voice crackled again in her earpiece, urgent and low. "Don't do it. If you give him access, he'll wipe us all out." Tears blurred her vision. Matteo's eyes found hers, pleading silently. The boy who had depended on her for everything was now depending on her again. But this time, the cost was everything. Time stretched into eternity as her mind raced for a way out. Then an idea formed, reckless and desperate. She whispered into the comm, "Vincenzo, true? Sme." And then, with a steadying breath, she raised her hands in surrender. "All right," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "I'll give you what you want. But first, let Matteo go." Salvatore laughed, a sound like poison. "Oh no, little Marino. You're not in a position to negotiate. You do as I say, or you watch him die." Lucia stepped closer to the terminal as if preparing to enter the codes. But beneath the console, her fingers brushed the small device Vincenzo had slipped her before the mission. A pulse detonator designed to disable the compound's main power grid. She glanced once at Matteo, then pressed the trigger. The world erupted into chaos. Lights died, screens went black, alarms wailed. In the confusion, gunfire erupted in the hallways as Vincenzo's strike team stormed the compound. Lucia dove for Matteo, cutting through his restraints as bullets shattered the walls around them. Salvatore roared orders, but it was too late. The building was falling into their hands. Yet even as they fled through the smoke and destruction, Lucia knew this was far from over. Salvatore had escaped. Matteo was safe. But a new, darker truth was now clear. This was no longer just about revenge or power. It was personal. And the final battle would not be fought with guns or money. It would be fought with blood. The world outside the compound was chaos. Sirens screamed across the night sky as flames devoured what was left of Catalano's command center. Lucia clutched Matteo against her chest as they stumbled into the waiting SUV. He was shaken, but alive, and for now, that was all that mattered. Vincenzo climbed in beside them, his face pale beneath streaks of blood and soot. They had survived, but barely, and survival was not victory. Back at the estate, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Armed men patrolled the perimeter in double shifts. Communications were locked down. The Catalanos would not take this humiliation quietly. And as dawn broke over Chicago, the first retaliation arrived. 2 Russo-owned warehouses were torched before sunrise. A trusted accountant vanished on his way to work. Anonymous messages filled Vincenzo's encrypted channels, each more threatening than the last. Salvatore had declared war. Lucia watched the storm gather from the balcony outside Vincenzo's office. Every instinct screamed to run, to take Matteo and disappear before the bloodshed consumed them all. But there was no running anymore. Too many people had died. Too many secrets had been unearthed, and deep down she knew that if they fled now, they would never stop running. Vincenzo joined her silently, his eyes fixed on the skyline. He looked older, harder than she had ever seen him, as if the weight of 1,000 decisions pressed down on his shoulders. The next move will decide everything, he said finally. Salvatore has money, soldiers, influence, but we have something he doesn't. What Lucia asked. Vincenzo turned to her, and for the first time she saw not the cold strategist or ruthless boss, but the man beneath. You. He has spent 30 years building a legacy on a lie, and now the truth walks and breathes in front of him. That terrifies him more than any gun. The next days unfolded like a game of chess played with live ammunition. Both sides struck and counterstruck. A Catalano shipment of weapons was intercepted on Lake Michigan. A Russo front company was bombed in retaliation. Salvatore's men raided a safe house only to find it emptied hours earlier. Every move was precise, every escalation carefully calculated. But beneath the surface, something darker was brewing. It came to a head one rain-soaked night when Marco burst into the study with a single line that changed everything. We found their mole. The words chilled the room. Betrayal was always a possibility in their world, but the identity of the traitor was a dagger to the heart. It wasn't a guard or an accountant. It was Dr. Callahan, Matteo's physician and one of the few people Lucia had trusted implicitly. He's been passing information about Matteo's condition to Catalano for weeks, Marco said grimly. They know his medical schedule, his vulnerabilities, even the location of the clinic where we get his treatments. Lucia's blood ran cold. Matteo wasn't just leverage. He was a weapon. Salvatore wasn't trying to kill them. He was trying to break them from the inside. Vincenzo's orders were swift. Lock down every medical supplier. Change every doctor. Double the guards on Matteo. But Lucia couldn't shake the gnawing dread in her gut. If Salvatore knew Matteo's vulnerabilities, he would exploit them. It was only a matter of time. That time came sooner than anyone expected. 2 nights later, Matteo collapsed in his room, struggling to breathe. His inhaler was missing. Panic exploded through the estate as medics were summoned and security scoured the grounds. It was sabotage. Someone had tampered with his medication. Lucia knelt beside her brother, whispering desperate prayers as monitors screamed around them. When he finally stabilized hours later, pale and weak but alive, something inside her shifted. This was no longer about reclaiming a legacy. It was about survival, about vengeance. Vincenzo found her in the chapel at dawn, staring at the flickering candles with hollow eyes. "I'm done waiting," she said quietly. "No more defensive moves. No more hiding. We take the fight to him." His gaze hardened. "That means crossing a line we can't uncross." "Then we cross it," she replied. "He came after Matteo. Now we go after his heart." A plan began to take shape. Dangerous, audacious, and brutally effective. Salvatore had a single weakness: his daughter Isabella, a reclusive art curator who had remained untouched by the family business. She was the one thing he valued more than power. If they could reach her, they could force Salvatore into a position he could not defend. Vincenzo H. hesitated. Using an innocent is not how we do things. Neither is poisoning a sick boy, Lucia shot back. But this isn't about morality anymore. This is war. And so, under cover of night, preparations began for the most dangerous mission of their lives, one that would push them deeper into the shadows than ever before. But as the plan took shape, a single chilling question lingered in Lucia's mind. When you hunt monsters long enough, how long before you become one yourself? The rain came down in heavy sheets the night they set the plan into motion. It felt almost symbolic, as if the sky itself understood the blood that was about to be spilled. Lucia stood by the black SUV, pulling on the dark jacket Marco had handed her, her pulse thundering in her ears. This was no longer the terrified maid who once sang lullabies while polishing windows. This was someone else entirely, sharper, colder, and ready to do whatever it took. The target was a private art gallery in the heart of the city, owned and curated by Isabella Catalano. It was her sanctuary, a place far removed from her father's bloody empire, and precisely why she never traveled with heavy security. It also made her the perfect leverage. But for Lucia, this was more than a mission. It was a statement. Salvatore had gone after her brother. Now she was going after his heart. Vincenzo's hand brushed her arm as the team prepared to move. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice quieter than usual. "Once we do this, there's no going back." Lucia met his gaze without flinching. There was no going back the moment he came for Matteo. This ends now. The operation was surgical. Marco's team disabled the gallery's alarm systems while Carlos handled the cameras. Lucia slipped inside with two of Vincenzo's men, the silence broken only by the distant patter of rain against glass skylights. She moved like a shadow, each step precise and deliberate, until they reached the private viewing room where Isabella was expected to be alone. But when the door swung open, the room was empty. A faint trace of perfume hung in the air, and two untouched glasses of wine sat on a table. "She's gone," Marco hissed through the comm. The intel was bad. Lucia's stomach dropped. Bad intel wasn't just a mistake. It was a trap. The lights went out. A split second later, floodlights burst to life, blinding them as heavily armed men stormed the room from all sides. "Get down," Marco shouted, but it was too late. Lucia was dragged to her knees, her wrists yanked behind her back. A familiar voice echoed from the doorway, slow and mocking. "You've grown bold, little Marino." Salvatore Catalano stepped into the light, immaculate in a tailored suit, his silver hair slicked back, his eyes gleaming with cold amusement. "Did you really think I wouldn't see this coming? You touch my daughter, and you think I'd just sit back and watch?" Lucia's heart pounded, but she refused to look away. "You came for my brother. You poisoned him." Salvatore smiled thinly. "Your brother was collateral damage, but this is a declaration of war." Vincenzo's voice crackled through her earpiece, low and urgent. "Lucia, where are you? We lost visual." Before she could answer, one of Salvatore's men ripped the device from her ear and crushed it beneath his boot. "You see, Marino," Salvatore continued, circling her like a predator, "I've let you live this long because I was curious, but now you've proven yourself a problem, and problems must be erased." He raised his hand, and two men dragged her toward a waiting van. But before they could force her inside, chaos exploded outside the gallery. A convoy of black vehicles screeched to a halt as Vincenzo's men swarmed the compound. Gunfire shattered the night, glass rained from the windows, and in the confusion, Lucia was thrown behind a marble column. The sound of bullets was deafening, the acrid smell of smoke, thick in the air. Vincenzo appeared moments later, cutting through the chaos like a storm given form. He shot the guard closest to her, grabbed her wrist, and pulled her to her feet. "You're insane," he growled, but the relief in his eyes betrayed his fury. "I told you this was too dangerous. And I told you I'm not hiding anymore," she shot back. They fought their way through the gallery, every hallway a battlefield, Marco and Carlos covered their escape, but as they reached the exit, a sharp crack split the air. Lucia felt a searing pain tear through her shoulder and stumbled, the world tilting sideways. Vincenzo caught her before she hit the ground. "Stay with me," he ordered, his voice breaking in a way she had never heard before. "Don't you dare leave me now." They barely made it out alive. The SUV roared away into the night, gunfire fading behind them. Lucia's vision blurred, darkness closing in at the edges. Somewhere in the haze, she heard Vincenzo's voice, raw and desperate. "You're stronger than this. You're not allowed to die." When she woke, it was in a dimly lit room in the estate's medical wing. The pain in her shoulder was a dull, steady throb. But she was alive. Matteo was asleep in a chair beside her bed, his small hand curled around hers. Vincenzo sat on the other side, his face drawn and tired. "You almost died tonight," he said quietly when he saw her awake. "I know," she whispered, "and I'd do it again." He shook his head, frustration and fear warring in his eyes. "This war is spiraling out of control. Salvatore won't stop until one of us is dead." "Then we end it," she replied. "No more traps, no more defenses. One final move." Vincenzo studied her, and in that moment something shifted between them. It was no longer just about revenge or survival. It was about destiny, about finishing what had begun decades ago. And as the rain continued to fall outside, a plan began to form, one final, irreversible strike that would end the Catalano reign once and for all. But buried deep within that plan was a secret Vincenzo had not yet shared. One that, if revealed, could shatter the fragile bond they had built and change everything Lucia thought she knew about loyalty, love, and the truth. The morning after the failed abduction and near-fatal mission, the world around Lucia felt heavier. The sky above the Russo estate was bruised gray, clouds rolling over the horizon like a warning of the storm that was still to come. Her shoulder burned with every movement, a reminder of how close death had come, but pain no longer frightened her. What terrified her now was the silence, the waiting. Salvatore Catalano would not let last night's humiliation stand, and she was done waiting for him to strike first. Vincenzo entered the room quietly, his usual mask of control thinner than she had ever seen it. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, his jaw clenched with unspoken rage. He stood at the foot of her bed for a long moment before speaking. "We end this. No more negotiations, no more games. Salvatore dies." Lucia's breath caught, not from fear but from the weight of what those words meant. If we kill him, we inherit his war. Every enemy he's ever made becomes ours. Vincenzo stepped closer, his gaze hard. If we don't, we inherit his knife in our backs, and your brother will never be safe. A meeting was called in the war room before noon. The table was littered with satellite images, dossiers, encrypted messages. Salvatore was planning a summit of the old families in 2 days. A show of strength to prove he was still in control. It would be his last mistake. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. Strike the summit, take Salvatore alive if possible, kill him if necessary, and seize control of everything. Lucia listened as Marco laid out the strategy, every detail cold and precise. Infiltration teams through the east entrance, snipers on the north row of line, heavy assault from the west once the first wave breached. It was war, the kind her grandfather had once fought, the kind that had destroyed her family decades ago. And now, she would be the one to end it. The night of the summit arrived cloaked in tension. Lucia dressed in black, her shoulder bound tight, her pulse steady despite the storm raging inside her. Matteo begged her not to go, fear etched into every line of his face. "I have to," she told him softly. "If I don't finish this, we'll never be free." The convoy rolled into the heart of Chicago under the cover of darkness. The Catalano estate loomed ahead, a fortress of stone and steel, heavily guarded but not impenetrable. Marco's voice crackled through the comm as the first breach team moved in. East gate secure, sniper positions ready. Lucia moved with Vincenzo through the main corridor, their footsteps silent against marble floors. Gunfire erupted somewhere deeper in the compound, followed by the sharp crack of explosives. The assault had begun. The air smelled of gunpowder and smoke as they pushed forward toward the grand hall where the summit was taking place. When they burst through the double doors, chaos exploded. Dozens of armed men opened fire, bullets ricocheting off pillars and chandeliers. Vincenzo's men surged forward, returning fire with ruthless precision. Lucia ducked behind an overturned table, heart pounding, until a familiar voice cut through the noise. "You really came yourself." Salvatore stood at the far end of the room, flanked by heavily armed guards. His expression was a mix of contempt and grudging respect. "I underestimated you, Marino. That won't happen again." "This ends tonight," Lucia shouted, rising from cover, gun in hand. "For my grandfather. For every life your family destroyed." Salvatore laughed, cold and bitter. "Do you really think killing me changes anything? This world will eat you alive. You're a maid playing queen." "Maybe," she said, stepping closer, but this maid learned how to fight back. The room exploded into chaos again as the final wave of Vincenzo's men stormed in. One by one, Salvatore's guards fell until only he remained, cornered and disarmed. He looked at Lucia, and for the first time, there was no arrogance in his eyes, only a cold acceptance. "Do it," he hissed. "Finish it." Her finger tightened on the trigger. Every reason to end his life flashed through her mind. Matteo's suffering, her family's murder, decades of blood and betrayal. But then another thought surfaced, quieter but stronger. If she killed him, she would be no different from the men who had burned her family alive. If she pulled the trigger now, she would become the very thing she hated. "No," she whispered, lowering the gun. "I'm not like you." Vincenzo stepped forward, his own weapon raised. "I am," he said softly, and fired. The shot rang through the hall, and Salvatore Catalano crumpled to the ground. The war was over. In the days that followed, the criminal underworld shifted on its axis. With Salvatore gone and the Catalano Empire fractured, the old families were forced to acknowledge a new order, the Marino-Russo alliance. Territories were divided under new agreements, blood debts settled, power realigned. For the first time in decades, there was peace, fragile but real. Months later, on a warm spring evening in Sicily, Lucia stood on the balcony of the restored Marino villa, the same one she had seen in faded photographs as a child. Matteo was laughing somewhere in the garden below, stronger and healthier than he had ever been. And beside her, Vincenzo stood watching the sea, the weight of countless battles finally lifted from his shoulders. "We did it," he murmured. "You did it." Lucia smiled, the sound of distant waves mingling with the faint echo of a song she had once hummed while cleaning windows, the same song that had started everything. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "The blood, the war, everything we had to do to get here." Vincenzo turned to her, his gaze steady. "Every day. But I would do it all again if it meant ending up here, with you." As the sun dipped below the horizon, he knelt before her and opened a small velvet box. Inside was a ring, simple, elegant, timeless. Lucia's breath caught as he spoke. "Marry me." Not as the heir of Marino or the boss of the Russos, but as the woman who changed everything. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. "Yes." In that moment, the past finally released its grip. The maid who once sang in the shadows had become something far greater. Not a pawn, not a victim, but a queen who had reclaimed her family's legacy and carved her own destiny from the ashes of betrayal. And as the stars rose over the Mediterranean, Lucia knew their story was only just beginning, a story of power and redemption, of love born in violence and forged in fire, and of two souls who had found each other in a world that had tried so hard to tear them apart.